So why then, as a country that is more than 90% black, have the grooming policies in our public schools targeted Rastafarian students in particular and black hair in general? As with everything else, it has its roots in our colonial past. When Jamaica's education minister announced this week that male Rastafarian students would no longer be required to wear tams to cover their dreadlocks in schools, it would have seemed like a step in the right direction if we weren't a black majority country 61 years removed from British rule. After all, Jamaica is the birthplace of Bob Marley, one of the world's most famous and recognizable Rastafarians. And even though dreadlocks didn't originate in Jamaica, people all over the world associate dreadlocks with Jamaican culture. So why then, as a country that is more than 90% black, have the grooming policies in our public schools targeted Rastafarian students in particular and black hair in general? As with everything else, it has its roots in our colonial past. In the book Race and Color in Colonial and Independent Jamaica, Altink speaks to this subtle messaging that paints our African features as negative while at the same time praising Eurocentric features. It's this type of messaging that has been passed down through generations of black children and which our school administrators now joyfully implement. Until long after independence, men not blessed with good hair often wore hats or caps or cut their hair very short. This taught children that race was not just about skin color, but also physical features. In particular, hair, but also nose breadth, eyes, and other racial features. She also mentioned the practice of mothers pinching the nose of the children to make their nose look more, pointed. Now, some people may say that a lot of the discriminatory practices, particularly around here, is far removed and long gone in our history. But I actually found documented cases of this happening in our very recent past. Let's not forget that it was just in 2016 that a corporate area prep school sent home a 3-year-old boy because they felt that his curly hair would give the other children lice. Might I also remind you that it was only in 2020 that Jamaica's Supreme Court ruled that the Kensington Primary School was within their right to ban a 5-year-old child with dreadlocks from their school and that they did not violate the child's constitutional rights. So, why does black hair and dreadlocks in particular make people feel so uncomfortable? I'm going to read from the book Rastafari, Roots and Ideology by Professor Barry Chevannes. The most outstanding characteristic of the dreadlocks is, of course, his hair, a sacred and inalienable part of his identity. It defines his status. The longer his locks, the greater his standing as a professor of the faith. He affectionately calls his hair his crown, comparing it to the real crown of his king Selassie, and sometimes to the mane of the lion, a symbol of male strength. Another paper entitled The Hairs on Your Head Are All Numbered, Botchway says, some wear the locked hair, dreadlocks, for fashionable purposes, albeit with a sense of an African cultural pride and awareness. Despite the faddish aspect, the dreadlocks hairstyle has been a noticeable expression of cultural self-determination for many people of African descent. Many prefer locks over chemical straightened hair in a conscious pursuit of Afrocentricity, nonconformity to artificiality, cultural resistance to Western hegemony, and notions of grooming and beauty, and a proud self-representation which connects them to Africa and its classical civilizations. So when you look at all this, you can see that hair has always been very meaningful to Black people. And for Rastafarians in particular, their dreadlocks not only portrayed their strength, but a part of wearing their dreadlocks was to show their nonconformity to any notions of European grooming and beauty, anything that is expected, that was expected of them in this Eurocentric society. They wanted to do the opposite. And by forcing them that if they wanted to partake in institutions of this society, such as schools, then they needed to shun that outward Africanness and conform. Noel Erskine, in his paper, The Roots of Rebellion and Rasta Theology in Jamaica, wrote, "The colored class in Jamaica looked down on the black underclass, of which Rastas were a large part, and judged them incapable of the requirements to become successful in Jamaican society. The black underclass was locked out of educational and economic opportunities. Many of the secondary high schools were reserved for the children of the colored class. This was the case with many jobs in the civil service and banking sectors. To be successful in the Jamaican society of the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, one had to abandon blackness." And so when you examine the history, it is not difficult to see why these grooming practices that are largely discriminatory to dark-skinned Jamaicans with Afrocentric features, it's not difficult to see why it is so pervasive in our institutions and in particular our schools. It serves as a constant reminder of who is really in control of our institutions. To teach the black underclass that if we want to partake in the benefits of these institutions, we will do so by Eurocentric rules and Eurocentric standards. To understand our history is to understand why our government have been so reluctant to address these discriminatory grooming policies that have mostly targeted students of African descent in our schools. A quick Google search will show that our education minister has been making this same appeal to schools every year without any definitive policy or any action taken against institutions that violate the ministry's directive. If the will existed, the ministry could firmly put a stop to these discriminatory grooming policies. But our leaders are much more interested in giving the appearance of addressing an issue than actually addressing it.